This is Tommy's Outdoors 133. Today is the fourth and the last episode where we are going to talk about the CANN project. And the topic of this episode is upland blanket bog. But before I'm going to talk about this episode, I am giving you an opportunity to win one of the famous Tommy's Outdoors hats, right? This is one of those hats. If you're watching this on YouTube, 5-panel, solid construction, very good high quality hats, and you can win one of those hats. Now, how to win one of those hats? That's very simple. First of all, you need to be subscribed to Tommy's Outdoors newsletter. If you haven't already subscribed to Tommy's Outdoors newsletter, which you should, you can do it now. The link is in the description of this show, or just go to newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Okay. Once you're a newsletter subscriber, you need to email me by replying to one of those newsletters or just replying to the welcome email. And in that reply, answer simple question. And the question is, what is the most abundant species of deer in Ireland? Okay, so very simple. Just email me, make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter, and in that email, tell me what is the most abundant species of deer in Ireland. And that's it. And I'm going to draw a lucky winner. And if there's going to be, plenty of people emailing me with the answer, I may draw more than one winner, 2 or 3 or 5 maybe. It all depends how many of you will respond. So make sure you send that information to all your friends and colleagues and anyone who might be interested in Tommy's Outdoors podcast. Let them subscribe to Tommy's Outdoors newsletter. And that will increase your chance of winning a hat, because the more people will subscribe, the more people will email me an answer to this simple question, the more people I draw to receive the hat. Okay, I might do like a YouTube video when I'm gonna draw the winners or something like that. We'll see. So let's do this little fun game. And now the episode. So like I said, it's a upland blanket bog, and our guests are Roisin Grimes and Paul Sherlock, who are working on Upland Blanket Bog in CANN project. And as usual in those episodes, we're going to talk about how blanket bog was created, how it came to be, and what is the ecology of blanket bog, and what species are there, and also what are the threats to blanket bogs, and finally, what is the work on specific CANN sites that is being done to aid conservation and restoration of upland blanket bog. So very interesting episode as always. It's great pleasure to talk with those people who are actively working on conservation efforts. Obviously, we're gonna also talk about the stakeholder engagement, ever important subject. And just remember that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are personal views and opinions of my guests. They might or might not reflect the opinions of CANN Project or any of the bodies or of organizations that are part of CANN projects. I'm speaking with those people as individuals, and everything that they said reflects their views, their personal views, and their personal views only. Okay, so this is like a quick disclaimer in case anyone wants to get upset with anything. To be honest, I don't see why anyone would get upset with anything that we talk about here. It's a bog, right? But, some people might feel like urged to steer something on the social media. So in that case, just make sure you understand I'm talking with my guests as individuals, and these are their individual personal opinions. Okay? I hope that's clear. So yeah, folks, enjoy this episode of the podcast, and remember, subscribe to Tommy's Outdoors newsletter and send me an email with the answer to the question, what is the most abundant species of deer in Ireland? And then you can draw one of those lovely Tommy's Outdoors hats. All right, that's it. And now enjoy the episode. Welcome to Tommy's Outdoors, Roisin and Paul. How are you?
Very good, Tommy.
Hi, Tommy.
Good to have you on the show. This is fourth episode where we talk about CANN project, Collaborative Action for a Natural Network. And today's topic is upland blanket bog. But before we jump into this subject, round of introductions.
Yeah, so I'm Roisin Grimes. I work for Ulster Wildlife. So we're the largest local wildlife conservation charity in Northern Ireland. So we're a partner in CANN and we're doing loads of great work on the raised bog site. So I think you've already spoke with Simon on that. But we're also working on Culca, which is one of our cross-border upland sites. It's about 12,500 hectares. So yeah, I've been working on that for the past 4 years now through CANN.
Wow.
Yeah.
My name is Paul Sherlock. I work for the Heritage section in Monaghan Council and with the CANN project, where I am the conservation officer for the Slieve Bay site, which is an upland blanket bog, and it's across the counties of Monaghan, Fermanagh, and Tyrone. And we're doing a lot of conservation work up there at the minute.
Can you just lay it out to us? What is that work package that you're working on in CANN? So what is actual work that you're doing, and what are the aims? What you're aiming to achieve?
Yeah, so the uplands work package, we're mainly working. Well, I'm mainly working on Culca, and then I think yourselves in Monaghan or Slieve Bay, and then isn't the Isla guys under that work package as well? Yeah. So like the other work packages on the raised bogs and on the locks, we're kind of doing two things. So one of them is writing a management plan. So these are all special areas of conservation, special protected areas for their peatland and wetland habitats. So we're writing a management plan for each of them. So what are the issues and threats and pressures affecting the site at the moment? What are the actions that need to be put in place to protect the habitats and species and restore them? And then alongside that then, we've also been doing some restoration work and on-ground work. So like up on Culca, we've been doing erosion control and drain blocking. We're doing some non-native invasive conifer removal. And then alongside all that then, we do a lot of stakeholder engagement and landowner engagement just to support all of those actions. So that's like a high level of Culca, and I know you have been doing extra stuff on Slieve Bay as well.
Yeah, so Slieve Bay, we're doing a lot of similar stuff to Roisin and Kilka. So at the minute, we're doing conservation action plans for the Republic side of Slieve Bay, and then for the northern side of Slieve Bay. And again, our main probably objective is conservation works. So we've done a lot of drain blocking on the special area conservation on Slieve Bay, and also Ashbragg National Heritage Area. We've also done a lot of invasive species removal, so removing self-seeding conifers and rhododendron off the site. And I suppose one of our bigger projects the last while has been the creation of a wildfire management plan on Slieve Bay. So as you know, wildfires are getting more and more common, and we're just putting in, it's a plan just to help, I suppose, detail any threats of wildfires in Slieve Bay, and then what we can do to control them and, well, mainly prevent them. We're also doing other activities such as ammonia monitoring, so monitoring the air quality in Slieve Bay. And then, as Roisin mentioned, a lot of stakeholder engagement with local farmers and local stakeholders, local government agencies such as the Northern Ireland Environment Agency and National Parks and Wildlife Service.
I think a really huge part of the project has been all that information collection. Like we've collected a lot of remote sensing data, so LiDAR and SCIR technology, 3D mapping the site. We've also done the wildfire management plan, ammonia monitoring. There's been water monitoring. There's 4 years of bird survey data across all of the sites as well. So there's this huge, it's just a massive repository of data now that we've been basing the management plans on, but it's all there to inform future management of the sites long after CANN. So there's been lots of legacy aspects of it just because of the sheer amount of data collection and work that's been done.
I suppose legacy is probably the big thing that I suppose in years to come we'll have the groundwork done, so any other bits of funding or projects come and have a baseline to start at.
And is it those bird surveys, or are you folks working on that as well?
That's our partner Golden Eagle Trust.
Okay.
So they're a charity as well, and they've done a phenomenal amount of work. We were just chatting to them this morning. They've been tagging hen harriers over in Isla as well, on top of all the bird survey data that they've been collecting. I actually don't know how they're doing it. I know they sleep on the mountain sometimes to collect it, so they're really dedicated to the cause.
They love it.
They
No,
love
they
it.
love it.
Yeah.
They love
a lot
it.
of groundwork done there now.
Yeah, I'd say by the end of the summer they don't love it as much. They're probably exhausted, but yeah.
No, they prefer it over sitting in front of a computer and doing email. I bet you.
Yeah.
For sure. And is there this work that they're doing also part of the CANN project, or is it like they're okay? So they're also part of CANN. Wow, how many people in total?
There's 11 partners altogether, so you're chatting at least 2 per partner, and some of them could have, like I know Golden Eagle Trust maybe have 4 or 5 people just because of the amount of sites that they have. So there'd be well over, there probably around 30 of us altogether have been working on the project. Yeah.
Like I know in the Heritage and Monaghan kind of guys, we've probably 4 working on it at different capacities. So a lot of people involved in the project in total.
Yeah.
Wow. This is very impressive. As usual, I have many questions to ask, but before we go any further, upland blanket bog, can you lay it out to our listeners and viewers what is blanket bog and how it differs from other types of bogs?
Yeah, well, I suppose blanket bogs are generally formed in wet or upland areas. So the main difference is raised bogs are smaller and they're generally formed in kind of lowland areas. Raised bogs would tend to be a lot of the time deeper, probably. Blanket bogs are formed from the peat soils in areas pretty much where the climate's more cool or wet. That's probably the main difference between blanket and raised bogs.
Yeah, and I even think like the way that they were formed. So raised bogs are generally formed out of after the glaciers retreated, left behind all of these pools and lakes, which gradually started to infill. And then you got your peat, and it created like these sort of dome shape, which is where the raised bog comes out of. But for the blanket bogs, they generally tend to cloak the landscape. So you get them where there's like rainfall. I think it's over 1,200 millimeters a year. So Ireland's just perfect for them. Especially over west, you can actually get lowland blanket bog because it's so wet because of the Atlantic influence there. So yeah, you're chatting about like the difference is like the fact that it kind of cloaks the landscape, and your raised bogs are more of that domed shape.
Okay. And what was what are they like actively? Is the process of regeneration or creation of this bog still ongoing, or is it something that happened in the distant past and now we have it?
Yeah, so you get what they call active blanket bog. And that's where, so the way a bog forms is your vegetation is growing on the top. The conditions are so wet and acidic that it's difficult for the plant material to break down, and then that partially decomposed plant material is what forms the peat. So you need really wet conditions. So we do still have some intact bogs, blanket bogs across Ireland. They've been quite heavily degraded, but we do still have pockets of it. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to actually kick off that active process, but a lot of them, so the fact that they're forming peat, they're drawing carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it into the peat. So they are huge carbon stores, but a lot of our bogs now are actually emitting carbon. They're net carbon emitters globally. So although we do still have some pockets of active blanket bogs still sequestering carbon, we've lost a lot of that through damaging activities.
Yeah, I suppose even Sleep Bay, you see a lot of it. For a blanket bog, a lot of it's deteriorated over time, and I suppose due to a lot of things, peat erosion, overgrazing, wildfires, another big one. So I suppose with the CANN project, our main aim is probably to conserve these kind of areas like blanket bogs and Sleep Bay.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it always when this bog is non-active, then it becomes emitter of carbon, or is it just when it is getting damaged? That's why.
Yeah, I think it's basically whenever it starts to dry out and you lose that active process, you're allowing microorganisms and that come in and start breaking down the peat. So you start to get the carbon lost to the atmosphere, washed off into our water systems. So the main thing for a bog is like it likes to be wet. So anything, and you need to have the right species on there. So anything that removes that surface vegetation or dries out the bog, you're going to start getting that emission happening.
Gotcha. So you already touched on it. You already touched on the carbon situation, where that bog can be either carbon sink, good, or carbon emitter, bad. So that is kind of let me go to another question, which is why they're important for, and this is like a little bit of a cheeky question, right? Like, sure, they're important, but I'm sure like a lot of listeners will ask like why they're important. Then probably carbon is the one thing, but what are the other aspects of what is the other importance of those bogs ecologically or in any other
Well, I
setting?
suppose touching on the carbon thing, I suppose they've the potential to be a natural resource for combating climate change now, which is the big topic at the minute. They also purify the water. Bogs, a healthy bog absorbs water, reduces the impact of flooding and reduces runoff rates. They're also an important habitat for a lot of important species in Slieve Bay, such as hen harriers, red grouse, merlin. So wet bog is good for these protected species. And I suppose going back to carbon, a healthy bog, combats climate change. So I think going forward, conservation works such as drain blocking and re-wetting the bog are going to be important going forward.
Yeah, I think like they're so underrated. Like I think whenever you hear about carbon, everyone's saying, "Oh, let's get out there and we'll plant forests and we'll sequester all this carbon." But on a global scale, our peatlands store twice as much carbon as all of the forests in the whole world put together. Like a lot of the times you'll hear them referred to as our equivalent of rainforests. Like they're our rainforest, and people look out the window. Bogs are so common throughout our landscape in Ireland that people they're nearly desensitized to how important they are. Like the UK and Ireland have 20% of the world's blanket or peatland resource, or blanket bog resource. So like we should be really celebrating this amazing habitat that's on our doorstep. That like yes, there's the carbon. You don't want to get like carbon tunnel vision. They have so many other benefits, like Paul was saying, but even just like the cultural aspects of it. Like we did stakeholder surveys there on Culca about why is Culca important to you, and like 9 times out of 10 it was that landscape character aspect of it. Like it's so integral to the landscapes here and the recreational value of them as well. And even like as a farming resource, like a lot of our uplands are grazed as well. So it's a big like rural economy boost to have these sites in a healthy condition to support all of that. So I just think that they're just so underrated. Everyone keeps talking about forests.
That's true. That's very true. I heard a similar stories about the grassland as well. That actually grassland, like a proper grassland, absorbs way more carbon than forest, and even when it comes to biodiversity, I heard this phrase that the forest is where the animals hide, not where they live. They actually live on the grassland, and that's where they feed and so on. Folks, tell me about. So, I would like to hear more about what is the biodiversity situation, like how important is those bugs are for biodiversity, and how that looks like right now. Okay, I know that probably not great because we have this big problem with biodiversity, but in general, are these areas more biodiverse than the other, or maybe they should be but they're not?
I suppose Slieve Bay, parts of it would be. I suppose areas that haven't been, say, burned or haven't been overgrazed, so natural wet areas, the biodiversity there is probably in a good condition. So good condition blanket bog, dry heath. There's natural dystrophic lakes up there. A lot of the probably natural flora and fauna, as I mentioned earlier, hen harriers, healthy sphagnum moss. So parts of the bog, the biodiversity can be in good condition. It's probably the areas that are being eroded due to peat erosion and wildfires, overgrazing. They're probably the areas where biodiversity is lacking. So that's probably conservation wise where we'd want to improve on that to make sure, I suppose, biodiversity in general on the whole kind of bog is in a better condition.
Yeah, I think they're kind of interesting in that there's such harsh landscapes for anything to survive and thrive on. So what you do get there is generally quite adapted to live in those landscapes. And also because they're kind of almost like some of your last near natural wild areas, you do tend to get what would be considered quite rare and threatened species there, and they're rare and threatened in those landscapes as well. Yeah, as Paul was saying, like there's obviously lots of threats to them, but we still have, like, in Slieve Bay, you've got some incredible, like, user designator for hen harriers, obviously, and we've got the same on Culca. Really, golden plover's another one that's like this lovely little gold speckled bird that we get. So what you do find there is there's not a huge biodiversity, I would say, but what you find is quite well adapted to it. And because of that, if we lose these sites, there's nowhere else for them to go, really. Yeah.
And is there any part of CANN that kind of focuses on those species?
Yeah, a lot of our work would probably be, any area, say for example the hen harrier protected on Slieve Bay, so we'd be kind of avoiding any areas, say for example any conservation work that we're not impacting on a lot of their nesting areas. We're also doing nest protection activities, again to protect hen harriers, even any red grouse, making sure numbers are still high or still common in Slieve Bay. So a lot of our conservation work would be done with protected species and animals, part of our plan.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think on Culca, we were kind of at the stage of nearly trying to figure out what the situation was for the protected species. So all of those bird survey data, there's 3 gun clubs or red grouse protection groups on the Republic of Ireland side. So we've been doing a lot of work with them to let them know what's on their patch. They're really keen to see the data so that they can better resource and target the work that they're already doing. We trialed, so traditionally they would have done like burning for red grouse to get that shorter sward and the heather shoots. So we had like a vegetation, like a remote control flail vegetation management machine called a robo-cutter that we lent to them. So then they trialed it to as an alternative to burning to see how it would work. So anything that we've been doing, and I know in Slieve Bay is the same, has been kind of just tying in with work that's already being done on the ground, and then just trying to get an idea of what's actually up there. And then naturally the work that we're doing through the drain blocking and conifer removal and stuff will benefit the habitats and the species.
And I suppose education-wise, we would have done, along with Abby, we would have produced kind of a booklet called the Ice Bay booklet in Slieve Bay, and we just would have, distributed to local schools in and around Slieve Bay, and it just kind of give examples of the protected animals and plants up in Slieve Bay, so just to give more education on what's out there and what you should look out for. So that was a good resource for a lot of schools, and again through that they would have took part in school tours up in Slieve Bay. So even a lot of the local schools, a lot of the students wouldn't have even been up on Slieve Bay to see the blanket bog. So probably a good resource. Just they could see there was like 5 different animal species you could find in Slieve Bay, 5 different protected bird species such as the hen harrier. So it's a good example just to show them what they can see up in Slieve Bay and why the site's so important.
Well, this is probably I was a big fan of education in terms of like, this is the good start, like educate people and especially kids about what's there. And this is like everything starts from that, because if people don't know about it, then just they don't care, they can't protect it. Roisin, tell me about this robo thing. How does it work?
I see it in action. It's impressive.
Yeah. So do you know what? It was actually developed for, on the sides of motorways. Um, they're often quite steep, so there's accidents happening with people on ride-on lawnmowers. So it was developed for that purpose, where somebody could stand back and drive the big massive lawnmower up the side of it, but it's now been adapted to the conservation sector. So I know in other places they've used it for like bracken control and that. We've actually used it to cut heather brash to spray it on some of our eroded areas and that as well. But basically it's just a flail on the front of what looks like a big lawnmower, and you stand back and control it remotely, and it's tracked. It can go up steep slopes. It has its issues. You can imagine that a blanket bog can be kind of bumpy, and the ground clearance isn't great on it. So there's a new version out which is like try to deal with that issue, but it definitely has its benefits. Like even in the wildfire management, obviously we'd prefer to do re-wetting and grazing to control fuel loads in some of those high risk areas. But where that's not possible, things like the robo-cutter are a good alternative. So it's good, but it has to be used with caution, and you don't want to be going in and cutting nice habitat, and but it's been a really good engagement tool, funnily enough. Like we were trying to get farmers out to tell them about how great Culca was and the mountain and that, and we were getting some engagement, and then we hosted a couple of events with a robo-cut, and it was the best turnout that we've ever had. They just wanted to come and see the machinery. We were like, can we talk to you about birds, perhaps? So it was like the good fishing hook to get people in to come.
Exactly. At least you get them to show up, and it's like, yeah, look at that. We're gonna lead with a demo of RoboCut.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. No, but it's good to hear that there's a technology that that can help in this sort of work, and I guess this is better than burning, right?
Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to figure out. Like we've done a couple of trials, and we're waiting to see how the vegetation comes back in comparison. But hopefully, it's just another tool in the toolbox that we can use. It's not going to work everywhere, and sometimes burning might be what you need. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Listen, so you mentioned a couple of things that I want to follow up. First of all, you're talking about the gun club, and usually there is this usually you think that gun clubs and hunters and shooters they're just bad for biodiversity. But like, tell me how was that engagement with this gun club, or is it overall positive, or is it like more to do to get all the benefits? I'm just curious of your from the position of the scientist, from the position of the conservationist.
Yeah, well, I suppose stakeholder engagement probably at the start of the project could prove difficult at times, but I think from meeting the farmers, meeting the local gun club representatives, just explaining what they're trying to do, I feel the outcome is positive in general. I'd say gun club wise, as Roisin mentioned earlier, probably areas same as ourselves that we're looking to do conservation work. We're trying to avoid areas where these protected species are. So in general, the gun clubs are happy. Local stakeholders are happy. Again, re-wetting the bog increases the number of red grouse, that kind of thing. So in general, stakeholder engagement, I suppose, at the start might have proved a wee bit difficult getting our points across, but I think over the time of the project, it's definitely improved, and it's at a good level now. Even a lot of our conservation works, they're on landowner on their land, so we need their obviously permission and their engagement to partake in these works. So I feel for the most part, it's definitely improved, and it's good at the minute.
Yeah, and then see on Culca, like there's a gun club, and there's two gun clubs, and there's also a red grouse club. The South Leitrim gun club have been running this project, and Yeah, I do think like people do have that perception of gun clubs. They're out there shooting the species that we're trying to protect almost. But like in the area that we've been working with in Leitrim, they don't have any shooting happening in that site. They're just really passionate about seeing the grouse numbers come back. Like a lot of them have lived around the mountain for their whole life, and they remember when there was so many more grouse up there, and there was actual bird song up on the mountain and that. So they're just really passionate about bringing that back, and they're just the same for the gun club in Cavan. You know, they had said to us they know the site like the back of their hand. They know where the different species are. Like partnering with them is just a no-brainer because like they understand the history of the site, they understand where the species are, they understand the pressures and threats. So when we were doing the bird surveys, we went to them, we presented what we seen, they added different pressures and threats that they were aware of. Predator control is it's kind of a necessary evil, and that's the work that they are doing in these sites. They're not actually like again the Cavan Club isn't actually shooting red grouse, neither is the Leitrim Club. They're actually shooting the predators to try and boost the numbers of red grouse. And you don't like to see that happening, obviously, but because of all the land use changes that are happening and that these are such endangered species, it's kind of like a band-aid solution until we can put in place better management, better landscape scale management to try and boost the numbers and hopefully eventually not need to do predator control if that's a realistic vision to have. So yeah, I think you're right, Tommy. There's this kind of perception of them, and I probably would have had it before I got into the conservation sector. But you actually generally find that a lot of them are big nature enthusiasts and really want to help the work.
Good. It's good to hear that. And what are the predators they're controlling? Foxes mainly.
We actually have a big problem with corvids, like crows. Hooded crows is a big one for us. Like yeah, it's definitely foxes would be another one. The big issue on Culca is that the conifer plantations are planted right up to the edge of the bog, and they're a huge reservoir for predators. And the self-seeding conifers encroaching in on the bog are like a perching post for avian predators as well. So just speaking to the gun clubs, that would be a big thing, is most of them are coming out of those areas up until they wouldn't naturally be on the open landscape in the numbers that they are. It's just that they've got a hiding spot, like you were saying. Woodlands are where they hide.
I suppose Sleep may be similar in areas that right on the edge of the bog there is the kind of forestry plantation there. So, and I suppose from removing the self-seeding conifers from the bog, that's where we're hoping to reduce kind of predator numbers out in the bog. So that's the main aim.
I think it's about doing it like in a controlled and targeted way, isn't it? Like you're not just indiscriminately going out there and doing it. That's why all the data collection's really important to understand like what the actual predation pressure is.
Yeah. No, you know, like this is kind of a thing that is kind of like a pattern that I observe, that a lot of people who are passionate about the conservation, nature, nature loving people, they have this negative connotation, negative attitude towards hunters, anglers, and so on. But then every single time I speak with someone who actually engaged with those people, the outcome is like positive because of the knowledge, because of what they do is actually important in a way. So that's I'm glad to hear that, but I'm kind of not surprised, to be honest. Tell me, what would be the natural way to control those predators, right? Like what's the plan? Maybe not what's the plan, but what set of circumstances, what should happen in order for those predators to be somehow suppressed or under control?
Well, just to touch back on probably on Slave Bay, there's a lot due to as Roisin mentioned, there's a lot of areas of the edge of the bog on Slave Bay that's, forestry plantation is all along the edge. So a lot of our work, there would have been a lot of self-seeding conifers literally getting out onto the middle of the bog. So wind-blown seeds, birds taking seeds out, and then self-seeding conifers out in the middle of the bog. So I suppose a lot of our work would have been invasive species removal. So I think we've over about 40 hectares of self-seeding conifers removed. So I think that's a good start at helping stop the predators on the bog, and it's probably a natural way to get rid of them as well.
Yeah, I think I was actually speaking to the Golden Eagle Trust guys that did our bird surveys about this last week, and he was saying the issue is that we've kind of lost the next level up of predators, like the trophic systems out of balance. So he said generally you would have had things like goshawk or golden eagle there that would be, yes, they might take some of your ground nesting birds, but they would be keeping on top of those, especially the avian predators. And that would kind of open up space for those breeding birds then to be able to get their chicks up and away. The landscape scale stuff's definitely a big thing. Like predation's only one part of the issue that's affecting breeding birds up there, and if we're able to, through the conservation work that we're doing and the restoration work that we're doing, improve the habitats to make it easier for those species to survive and rear chicks, the numbers then will obviously be more sustainable too. So it's just kind of like almost trying to restore that balance back into the ecosystem again, isn't it?
And I suppose in the conservation action plans for Slieve Bay and Kilke, that'll be some of the pressures and threats we'd be looking at and how to kind of control those and, ensure they're not going forward, that they're improving.
What you're saying is, like, I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but it seems like without also working on those predators, right? Because this is like a typical thing, like mesa predators are, overabundant with a lack of the factors that are suppressing them, which are top predators and so on. So would you agree that until we have successful programs either breeding those predators or introduction in some cases, we are basically stuck with predator control by humans, because otherwise there's no way of actually suppressing them and rebuilding? Like, obviously you talk about corvids, right? So we have like birds that are present but not in big numbers, but we can kind of conserve them. But then when you talk about, for example, foxes, like fox and badger are like top predators, which is not natural. So would that be accurate?
I think it's just that two-pronged approach, like it's getting the landscapes right so that you wouldn't get these predators in the numbers that you're getting them up there in the first place. And the predator control is like a stitch in time sort of. It seems to have been that way for a long time now, but until we get the habitats right and until there is those species introductions programs happening. I think they're great as long as they're done in consultation with the local community groups, because that's the only way I think that they're going to be successful in the long run. And it's just around that education and engagement side of it. You should definitely speak to, I keep talking about them, Tommy. You should speak to the Golden Eagle Trust, because they've been involved in a lot of those introduction programs, and Lorcan, who we work with, has a great way with them when he engages with the farmers about these. So I think sometimes like that it can be sensationalized about like bringing in these top predators, and it's really a divisive topic, and it doesn't need to be if it's done in the right way.
Yeah. I was almost thinking, are you thinking like, Tommy, just don't go there. Just don't go there. Just don't mention. No, but you're right. I agree on all points. And I also understand that you might, since you're representing a project and you have this engagement with stakeholders, you don't even want to mention any of that, because I know that some groups, especially in the farming community, when you mention like say word wolf or like, oh my God, you're just done. So, and that kind of brings me to another part that I want to inquire and talk about the stakeholder engagement. how this thing was going, because this is super important. And like you said, any of those projects cannot be successful with the support of the stakeholders, and those stakeholders are people who are there on the landscape. They live there, they farm there, then they're doing all those things. And I guess my first question is, you mentioned about cultural importance of those bogs on those sites, about people grazing these sites and so on. And now again, very often is this view like this is exactly what is damaging the bog, right? So I guess it's not uncommon opinion that the best thing is like take the sheep off these sites, take the farmers off these sites, get rid of all of them, and then leave it alone, and then it will regenerate everything. It will be hunky dory. But obviously, there's like no reality to that, and also, I am wondering, is there any truth to that? So, how would you comment on, negative aspects of, treating these sites as a, heritage or historical sites and grazing and so on, and how that goes together or against the conservation efforts and trying to protect those sites?
Yeah, well, I suppose regarding the stakeholder engagement, probably in Slieve Bay, a lot of our work was done on land. There's a few large landowners there. So there's on Tashcone a large bit of land, and then just local kind of farmers. So I suppose getting them on board is probably the starting point. So again, I think it goes down to education. Just we're talking through, conservation, what we're hoping to achieve. I know everyone kind of might have a different approach on what we think should happen, how to go about it. Like our wildfire management plan, I suppose, Roisin, you'll have the same kind of thinking on this, that a lot of people have different opinions on it and what, the best solutions. So I know through our meetings for the wildfire management plan, we got Spanish experts in to do it. So when you have someone kind of that level telling the local stakeholders, local farmers, what can be done in Slieve Bay, what the pressures and threats for wildfires are, it probably gets the point across better. And then we've all probably got the same aim. Slieve Bay, like we're conservation wise, we're hoping to conserve the land. They own the land, a lot of the stakeholders, so they want to do what's right. So it's probably just getting that common approach. So going forward, we're all kind of, got the same plan. And I think something like the wildfire management plan is a good outlet for everybody get involved. The CAP will be something similar to the conservation action plan. So how all the local stakeholders, different community groups think the site should be protected, what could be done, and then probably just getting a common approach going forward on what we can all do as a whole to improve the conservation of the site.
On the grazing front, it's a real mixed bag on Culca. I can't speak for the rest of the uplands, but you do have areas of overgrazing, like bare peat, poach and all that kind of stuff. And you've got some areas that would be perceived as undergrazing. I think from my perspective, it's all about getting a balance, so a really good example is hen harriers on the site. They like really deep heather to nesting, so undergrazing then. And then your golden plover likes a really, really short sward because it likes to be able to see around it for any predators coming. So if you had like a blanket prescription on how all the sites should be grazed, it would all be just this one similar sward height across. It wouldn't be great for the diversity of species that we see up there. So that's one point. And then I think the other thing is, again, it can seem really divisive, but I think when you actually get in a room together, like Paul says, a lot of the times you're actually aiming for the same end point. You've just got different perspectives on it, and you kind of have to value what the landowner can bring to it, and what a conservationist can bring to it as well. There's areas on the site, like in terms of grazing, that we're actually thinking cattle grazing might be a good thing to bring into the site to actually improve sward diversity, to deal with, we've got a dominance of bracken. It can kind of become dominant after you get wildfires coming in. So sometimes grazing can be part of the solution, but definitely sometimes it is part of the problem. And it's just kind of looking at the site as a whole and trying to find that balance there. And like another example, we're thinking of maybe doing GPS collars on cattle, like trialing that as a way to make sure the cattle can get into sites that we would actually want them to be grazing, for the biodiversity benefits, but keep them out of areas like blanket bog, which generally doesn't really need as much grazing. So there's ways and means around it. I don't think that we should be sitting there saying, like, stop grazing these sites altogether, you're damaging it. It's just all about that balance across the entire landscape.
Yeah, funny enough, we up in Slieve Bay, we have a local farmer last year, and during the summer he was doing a bit of Dexter cattle grazing up there, and he had the GPS collars, so he's, from his phone, he can, see where they are on the site. He can move them to different areas, click of a button. So it gives you a good idea of, areas that needs to be grazed more, so we can move the cattle to there, and we can control them, keep them away from any kind of, waterways, that kind of thing. So it's worked out very well so far, and it's definitely needed on different areas of Slieve Bay. As Roisin said, the mixture between undergrazing and overgrazing, so it's just getting that kind of balance in different areas of the site.
If all human activity ceased on those sites tomorrow, like gone, how this would that help the situation? Would that make a situation worse? Do we even know what would happen?
Well, Slieve Bay, for example, there's actually not a whole pile of human activity. There's a small bit of farming kind of on the outskirts, small bit, but in general, there's not really a lot. I suppose human activity wise, there'd be turf cutting going on maybe at parts, different kind of heather management from burning there'd be happening. So I suppose they're both negatives for blanket bog. So if that was to cease, that would be it would be a positive for the site. But yeah, in general, Slieve Bay, farming wise, that kind of thing, there's not a whole lot going on. It would just be kind of on the outskirts, as I say, turf cutting, unregulated burning to control heather, that kind of thing. But not a large amount on Slieve Bay.
So why you need to do any restoration work or any conservation work if there's like, is it like deteriorating all by itself, or is it like a past activities that are causing
it? Would have been a lot in Slieve Bay. It would have been past activities, so there would have been a lot more peat and turf cutting years ago, and even there's been a few big fires in Slieve Bay. There was a big one in 2011, and then a large one in 2017 where I think it was close to a third of the site would have been burned. So that's a lot of the deterioration on the site is down to aspect like that. So hence why we're doing the re-wet and that kind of thing, just to kind of build those areas back up. So any of the works we're doing is kind of, we're looking and mapping where areas have been deteriorated and what we can do then to kind of, bring them back up to a good conservation status.
Yeah, I think on Culca, I've heard people saying that blanket bog is not an apex habitat, but that's the end point. Like some habitats want to become something else. Scrub wants to become woodland. Blanket bog should be self-sustaining, but what's happened is through drainage, through afforestation, peat cutting, overgrazing, we've lost that balance in it, and what we're really trying to do is restore it so it can become self-sustaining again. And the reason that we have to do the works is because we've had that human influence for centuries now, obviously, but on Culca we've a big issue with recreation pressure in parts of it. So some of the work we'd be doing would be to deal with that, and then erosion control. If we don't get in there at the moment and fix where we've got the bare peat, it will continue to erode, and we've seen in places that are eroding down to the bedrock, and that's all that peat and carbon lost. So the reason that we're getting in there is just to kind of restore that balance again, really.
What are the recreational pressures?
So Culca, kind of, it's one of the geopark sites, so it's a beautiful area anyway. So there would be a history of hill walking, caving as well would be quite common in it. We've through social media, there's a particular walkway called the Boardwalk, that has a really beautiful view at the top, and it just inexplicably took off in 2015. So the boardwalk was put in place over in an area of existing erosion. It was very controversial at the time, but people were doing it for the right reasons in their mind, was to try and reduce the impact of this erosion. But it actually then ended up drawing a lot of people into the site, and then at the end of it there was it's really sensitive habitat called Montane Heath. So Culca is like the second biggest expanse of it in Northern Ireland, and we were getting a lot of trampling and erosion around it. So we've been doing a bit of light touch work on it to try and contain people into smaller areas where they're hiking along, so that it's not spreading out 30 meters wide. It's contained to 1 to 2 meters wide to allow the rest of the habitat to restore. So yeah, that would be kind of another issue with recreation that we're finding is just generally people going up hiking. They're kind of veering off the main routes into areas where we would get like breeding golden plover, and that disturbance could be impacting productivity of some of the species. So again, it's just looking at like way markers and how we position them so that people kind of stay a wee bit more contained on the site.
It's very interesting because not long ago I had a conversation about the land access. It was more in a UK scenario, and I said like it's probably out of all these conservation nature issues, there's no one issue that I'm more on the fence than on this one, because on the one hand I would be very for access to land for people to be able to go out there and spend time in nature and all that, but then like you mentioned, the disturbance for birds and the footfall and the disturbance for any other things, and litter and fire risk and all that is also something that can be just dismissed. So that's funny that you mentioned that even thing like putting Broadwalk is something that draws people in, and this is having a negative impact on the environment.
Again, I think it's balance as well. Like even in the good weather now, you'd see you want people obviously going to Kilka, going to Slieve Bay, but then the more and more people you get, like we get kind of parts of Slieve Bay, a lot of quad use and scrambler use, which is obviously deteriorating parts of it. And then, as you mentioned, littering, and then fires, probably the big one. People even something like a barbecue up there. So it's getting a balance. We want people visiting these sites, but obviously, in a safe manner.
Yeah. Again,
education's probably a big part, isn't it?
That's it. Folks, just to wrap up a stakeholder engagement part of it, did you encounter any kind of less than friendly approach at the beginning, as sort of like, these environmentalists, scientists, greenies coming in telling us what we need, what we gotta do, and like a uncooperative attitude at the beginning? Or was it all smooth sailing and everybody was welcoming you with open arms and all that?
Well, I suppose I came in kind of during the middle of the project, but I know at the start there was a bit of, just a bit of kind of fight back to it's probably just, again, it's just education. A lot of people, as we mentioned earlier, are looking for the same outcome. They want to protect the bog, and they want to, do what's right for it. So it's just kind of getting everybody on the same wavelength. So as Roisin mentioned, everyone's looking for the same kind of goal. It's just they have different kind of perspectives and what's best to achieve it, or what's the best way to go about it. I know from, I suppose, some of our works, conservation works, like drain blocking, for example, you don't see the benefits straight away. So it's probably hard to put across the different kind of landowners, what the outcomes will be. But I think in general, the stakeholder engagement is very positive. And again, a lot of these landowners, they know the land. They've farmed in the land for years. So they know the background. So it's good to have their opinion and their kind of input into the works we're doing. And again, the works we're doing going forward.
Yeah, I'd say we were extremely lucky on Culca. I think that, especially in the Northern Ireland side, there's a geopark there, so they'd be quite used to engaging with the likes of charities and council and stuff anyways in these projects. A lot of their land is actually in the Culca Mountain Park and they have access through it and stuff. So from that perspective, we were quite yeah, we never really had any issues. I'd say almost met with more like apathy at times to what we were doing, because a lot of the work was like, especially in the Republic of Ireland side, was focused on like information collection, like getting to know what the habitats are like and the species are like. We wanted them to come in and tell us and get their information, but we didn't really have, you know, a carrot to bring them in. And then it was actually just trying to, there's over 400 landowners on the Republic of Ireland side, so even trying to figure out who everyone was and get to know them. We were really lucky. The only thing that we really came up against was we had proposed to do drain blocking in one of the areas, and some of the landowners were nervous about the impact of it would have for their grazing. And I definitely think it was something that we could have overcome and like come to solutions on, but we were really tight for time and we were able to find an area where a landowner was willing to do it. But no, like honestly, more apathy. And if they had anything, it wasn't to our face anyways, Tommy. They didn't have any.
Oh, gotcha,
I
gotcha.
say apathy. I feel like that's not fair. We had some really, really good engaged landowners and had some really great events. Actually, there's a big cohort, like the local community, just really interested from like a recreational perspective, and like a heritage side. Colca has lots of really interesting archaeology and heritage in that, so a lot of that tied into it. So there's a lot of interest in the site, but it never really translated over to animosity or fist waving at these green tree huggers or anything.
No, that's very good. And again, it is great to have those conversations because we're talking about a real situation, not imaginary. I think that a lot of what you hear in the social media and so on is kind of twisted and exaggerated, and it's not real situation. And now when I talk with you and other people who work on these projects, like on the ground, and actually talking with farmers, with hunters, with anglers, with people who live there doing their stuff, then it's more really truthful picture of how it looks like. And obviously there has to be some conflict, right? Like someone said that the conservation is managing conflict, but at the same time, it's better to focus on, like you mentioned, like you focus on the landowner who is more willing to cooperate and do your conservation work there. And you also have like a
Yeah,
limited resources.
I think it's like willing to cooperate, but so the landowner that we did the work with, it wasn't that he came in and he was like, fantastic, go for it, do whatever you want. Like, he was a contractor himself. So he said, you can do the work, but I want to do the work. So we trained him up to put the peat dams in himself, and he was the one that helped us figure out where to track the machine across. So that was John and Gary McNulty, like a father and son team, did the drain blocking, and the same thing, we did a lot of erosion control in an area, and that required diggers to go out in the ground, and it was on a commonage. So we had to get all the commonage owners to agree. There was 5 of them, and same thing again, they said you can do it, but we want to be the ones that do it. So we trained them up and paid the landowner, those that was Aidan and Terry McGovern, to do the work themselves. And it gave me so much anxiety at the time because we were responsible for training them and making sure nothing went wrong. But I think it's the best thing that has come out of the project from a Culca perspective, is that we now have got 4 landowners trained up in these peatland restoration techniques and interested in doing it in other places and coming up with innovative ways to restore these habitats. And
Yeah, I suppose stakeholder wise, yes, generally any of the work we've done, as I say, we needed the landowners, their stakeholders, their permissions, and they all seem quite happy for us to do the work. So in general, stakeholder engagement on Sleep Bay has been good, and we kind of hope it keeps that way going forward, so conservation can keep happening on Slieve Bay.
Very good. Very good. Folks, where the project is right now, so how much work was already done, how much work is still to be done? When you're wrapping up the project, what's the status?
Well, the project's actually finishing up in September, so the majority of actually, I know, on the ground works on Slieve Bay is pretty much done. So the big one at the minute is probably the Conservation Action Plan. So that'll leave a legacy for Slieve Bay going forward. So any conservation works can be done. They have a lot of data, a lot of details there, as I said before, and the pressures, threats, work already done, what can be done going forward. So yeah, in majority the works on the ground have been finished in Slieve Bay, and just going forward, it's about wrapping the works up at the minute.
Colca, we're again finished in September, and we're doing some conifer clearance at the start of September, finishing off all the management plans, a couple of wee events to tie up, and then that'll be us. I hope that like the stuff we have will be a bit of a legacy that local groups and stuff can take the management plan and use it to apply for funding or to continue on the works. And we're quite lucky that the geoparks there, the Culca Lakelands Geopark, they'll be able to, and they're really interested in continuing on some of the recommendations in the plan. RSPB are on part of the site too. So I think it's kind of just the start, hopefully, and that other projects will offshoot from it and people will take responsibility for some of the works.
I have a question about these conservation action plans. So how does that work? Are they being published somewhere, and anyone in the area or anyone who happens to live in a area where the upland blanket bog exists can download, get those, and start making implementing them? Or are they like specifically targeted for those sites and for those landowners and all those stakeholders? And then the second follow-up question on this is it then entirely up to them to implement those plans, or is it some sort of can they just come back to you or just anyone and say like, hey, we want to implement that, how to go about it?
I suppose, well, the conservation action plans, there'll be a lot of public consultation. I know we've that to come in Slieve Bay. We're going to be doing a bit of public consultation just on what a lot of the stakeholders, the landowners' thoughts are on the plan, where they think it can be improved, what pressures, threats they think are in Slieve Bay, and what they would, like to see been done going forward. Not sure, Roisin, do you know, will it be available to?
So the whole reason I think these were developed was because they were designated sites, and as part of that designation they have to have a management plan in place. So I know in Northern Ireland, NIA have done some in-house. They've contracted it out to some private contractors, and then projects like ERS and sister projects that are funded through EU funding were used to deliver the rest. So my understanding is that these are going into NIEA, and that there should be some sort of, I'm pretty sure there'll be some sort of public facing version of the document. Obviously there's a lot of sensitive information in there about like landowners and stuff that won't be public facing. And then their whole idea in Northern Ireland, at least, was that they've collated all this information about all the designated sites across Northern Ireland. So they're able to look across it and say, right, actually, we've got a huge issue with drain blocking or forestry encroachment and stuff. That's where we need to direct funding or project supports and stuff. So it's kind of, yes, it's been done on a site basis, but it's also been used to inform where policy changes need to be made, where funding needs to be funneled. And then a lot of the works can actually be done through existing structures, like agri-environment schemes can deliver a lot of it. And then through the project, we've already set up like different groups and give groups information so that they can take ownership of aspects of it through like the consultations that we're saying there. So like there is like a public facing documents that are going to be made for Culca and Slieve Bay. I know Chris is working on that, isn't he? To kind of digest it, because they're they're not light reading. Like they're 200 pages long. I don't think anyone, even if they were available, people maybe wouldn't want to
A lot of
pick them up and
information.
read them. Yeah. So there's going to be like an easily digestible summary version for our 2 sites anyways.
Gotcha. Folks, listen, to wrap this up, you're doing great work. This is really fantastic, and I'm sure that listeners and viewers learned as much or more than I did. Since you are really at the forefront of this conservation work, you are there on the ground making a difference. On the other hand, most of people interested in nature, they're listening to the news, and there's just like a very bleak views. The climate is changing, biodiversity is collapsing, oceans are on fire, all these things. From where you sit, how do you see the future? How do you see the future of bogs and habitat and biodiversity? Take that question wherever you want, in Ireland, in the world. Just curious, how you process that and how you see these things, because obviously you also kind of ingesting all the news and all the doom and gloom, but at the same time you're doing a lot of very positive work on the ground and you see things progressing. So what are your views on biodiversity and nature in the next 10, 20, 50 years?
Well, I suppose looking at what we're doing regarding blanket bogs, so blanket bogs and forests, that, for example, are going to become more and more important due to the climate, due to the carbon that the bogs and forests store. So I feel they're an important resource now and going forward, and I feel more needs to be done probably to protect these. Even farmers, kind of rewilding hedgerows, that kind of thing. To increase biodiversity. So I think any of these resources that we have need to be protected and then maintained going forward to, reduce our emissions and improve the amount of carbon we're keeping in bogs.
Yeah, no, I think it would be quite easy to get a bit despondent or caught up in all of that, but I think we're quite lucky in that when you're actively out there trying to do the work to improve biodiversity and carbon and stuff, it makes you feel like you've got a little bit of power, that you're actually trying to do something, even if it's only on your little patch. Kind of helps dispel some of that doom and gloom sometimes. And then in terms of the blanket bogs, I heard a really nice quote, and I don't know who it was now, but they basically said that the blanket or bogs were kind of like our mother figure in Ireland. Like they fed us, they clothed us, they kept us warm. They did so much for us, and now she's in her older age now, and she needs us to look. She's still got value, and she needs us to look after her. And I was like, oh, that's just such a nice way to look at it, isn't it? That, that it's our turn to look after the peatlands.
So you're also optimist. Okay, I folks, I file you as an optimist then for the future. Listen, thank you very much. It's been very educational, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks a million, Tommy.
Thanks very much.